Action 1. Stop chasing their approval. As parents, we spend a lifetime giving to our children, raising them, guiding them, making sacrifices big and small to see them happy. For decades, much of your identity may have been wrapped around their needs. But then, somewhere along the way, the roles begin to shift. Maybe they start interrupting you when you speak, brushing off your advice, or speaking to you in a tone that stings. Suddenly, you feel less like a respected parent and more like an afterthought, and the first impulse is often to remind them of all you've done, the sleepless nights, the countless sacrifices, the years of putting them first. You might feel angry, frustrated, or tempted to argue your way back into their respect. But here's the truth, anger rarely restores respect, and neither does pleading. In fact, the harder you push for their approval, the further it slips away. The first and most important step in regaining respect is not about changing them, it's about changing you. Stop chasing their approval. When you constantly bend over backward to keep them happy, when you say yes even though your heart says no, when you rearrange your life to make theirs easier, you unintentionally teach them that your feelings and time are less valuable than theirs. Over time, this pattern makes it easy for them to take you for granted. Respect doesn't come from endless self-sacrifice, it comes from self-respect. Think about Margaret, a strong and independent woman in her younger years. As she got older, she started silencing her own opinions, allowing her children to make all the decisions, and excusing the way they sometimes spoke down to her. "I just want to keep the family together," she would say. But instead of bringing the family closer, it caused her children to stop valuing her voice. They assumed she would always adjust, always stay quiet, always put herself last. It wasn't until Margaret began making small but powerful changes that things shifted. She began saying no when something didn't feel right, she spoke up calmly when her voice was ignored, and she began honoring her own time and priorities. At first, her children were surprised, but over time, they began to see her differently, not as someone who was desperate for approval, but as someone who carried dignity and strength. The truth is, respect starts inside you. When you stop acting like you need constant validation, you start walking taller, speaking with more confidence, and carrying yourself with quiet authority. People, including your children, notice this energy, and it changes the way they respond. Respect cannot be begged for or forced out of others, but it can be inspired. And it begins with you showing, through your actions and boundaries, that your life and your feelings are worthy of respect. The moment you stop chasing their approval and start valuing yourself is the moment they begin to value you too. Action 2. Don't argue, lead by example. When your children interrupt you, dismiss your opinions, or talk down to you, it can feel like a knife to the heart. After all, you spent decades raising them, guiding them, teaching them right from wrong, and now they turn around and treat you as though your wisdom carries no weight. In that moment, the instinct to argue back can be very strong. You want to remind them of the sacrifices you made, the lessons you taught, the respect you deserve. But here's the hard truth, arguing almost never restores respect. Respect doesn't grow out of shouting matches or heated debates. It rarely comes from loud words, demands, or trying to win an argument. In fact, the more you argue, the more you send a message that you are fighting for something you don't already have, and that very act can make your children feel they hold the upper hand. When you meet disrespect with anger, all you do is confirm their belief that they have power over you. A better, wiser, and far more effective approach is to lead by example. Respect is not something you can force with words, it is something you inspire by the way you carry yourself. That means listening more than you speak, responding with calm confidence instead of frustration, and refusing to be pulled into endless power struggles. Your composure, your steadiness, and your quiet authority speak louder than any argument ever could. Take Frank, a retired teacher who had once commanded a classroom full of teenagers with ease. At school, his students respected him because he never lost his cool and always spoke with quiet certainty. But at home, things were different. His grown children dismissed his advice, rolled their eyes when he spoke, and sometimes even laughed at him when he tried to correct them. At first, Frank fought back, raising his voice, arguing, trying to prove he still deserved their respect. But the more he argued, the worse things became. His words didn't carry weight anymore, they only fueled the tension. Then Frank made a conscious shift. Instead of arguing, he began listening carefully when his children spoke. He responded calmly, without desperation or anger. He stopped chasing respect with words and started carrying himself like a man who already had it. Over time, his children began to notice. They saw a man who didn't need to win every battle, who wasn't desperate for their approval, but who spoke with dignity and presence. Slowly, their tone toward him changed. They began to mirror the same calm respect he modeled. That's the power of leading by example. Your children may resist your words, but they cannot ignore your presence when you carry yourself with quiet strength. They will eventually reflect the energy you show them. So instead of demanding respect, show them what it looks like through patience, calm authority, and steady self-respect. Over time, they will come to respect you not because you forced them to, but because you inspired them to. Action 3. Withdraw emotional dependence. One of the most painful but necessary lessons as we grow older is realizing that our children cannot and should not be our only source of emotional fulfillment. When you lean too heavily on them for comfort, reassurance, or a sense of purpose, the relationship often begins to shift in ways you never intended. What starts out as love and closeness can quietly turn into pressure for them, because they feel responsible for carrying your happiness. Over time, instead of drawing them closer, this dependence can push them away. The truth is, emotional independence is not only healthy, it is deeply attractive and naturally commands respect. When you carry yourself as someone who is centered, fulfilled, and able to stand on your own 2 feet, your children see you differently. They don't see someone fragile or needy, they see someone strong, whole, and worthy of admiration. Take Helen's story, for example. After losing her husband of 50 years, she found herself alone in a quiet house filled with memories. The silence felt unbearable, so she started calling her children constantly, hoping they would fill the emptiness in her heart. At first, they tried to comfort her, but as the weeks went on, the weight of her need grew heavy. They began to avoid her calls, answering less often, sometimes with impatience in their voices. Helen felt hurt and abandoned, but what she didn't realize at first was that her dependence was draining them instead of drawing them closer. The turning point came when Helen decided to reclaim her life. Instead of waiting by the phone, she joined a local book club, started gardening again, and took long walks where she practiced gratitude for small things, the sunlight, the breeze, a neighbor's smile. She created little routines that gave her day structure and meaning. Slowly, she built a life that was her own, one that didn't rely on her children to keep her standing. She even made new friends, people who shared her interests and gave her fresh energy. Something surprising happened then. She stopped calling her children first. Not because she was angry or trying to punish them, but because she no longer needed them to fill her emptiness. And to her amazement, the less she leaned on them, the more they began reaching out to her on their own. Their voices grew warmer, their visits more frequent. Why? Because they now saw her not as someone fragile and dependent, but as a woman living fully, someone they could admire and connect with on equal ground. This is the power of withdrawing emotional dependence. It sets you free, restores your dignity, and paradoxically draws your children closer in genuine love rather than obligation. When you stop making them responsible for your emotional stability, you reclaim your center and give them the gift of seeing you strong, independent, and whole. That is when respect and care naturally return. Action 4. Set boundaries and enforce them. One of the most important steps to earning respect from your children, or from anyone, is learning to set boundaries and stand by them. People, including family, will treat you the way you allow them to treat you. If you quietly accept being interrupted, dismissed, or spoken to with disrespect, it will keep happening because you've silently taught them that it's okay. Setting boundaries is not about being cold, harsh, or distant. It is about showing others that your feelings, your time, and your dignity matter just as much as theirs. Boundaries are a way of saying, I value myself, and I expect you to value me too. For many parents, this is difficult because they have spent decades putting their children first, often sacrificing their own needs without complaint. But as the years go on, if you never speak up, you begin to feel invisible, and invisibility is one of the most painful forms of disrespect. Robert, a retired father of 3, struggled with this for years. His children would interrupt him in mid-sentence, dismiss his ideas, and sometimes make light of his free time as though it wasn't important. At first, Robert tried reasoning with them, but his words had little effect because he never followed through. One day, he decided something had to change. The next time they interrupted him, he didn't raise his voice or argue. He simply paused and said, "I'll finish when you're ready to listen." When they belittled his time, he calmly responded, "I won't continue this conversation if you speak to me that way." At first, his children pushed back, rolled their eyes, or tried to test whether he really meant it. But Robert stayed consistent. He didn't lose his temper, and he didn't let the disrespect slide. Over time, they realized he was serious. Something shifted, they began to listen longer, interrupt less, and speak to him with more care. What changed wasn't his children alone, it was Robert. By holding firm to his boundaries, he taught them how to treat him. This is the heart of boundaries. They aren't about controlling others, they're about teaching others how you expect to be treated by consistently enforcing your own standards. And here's the key, boundaries only work if you are calm, gentle, and consistent. If you yell, beg, or cave in after one pushback, the cycle continues. But if you stay steady, clear, and firm, people eventually adjust. Your children may not always agree with you, but they will learn to respect you because they'll see that you respect yourself. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out, they are guidelines that protect your peace and ensure that relationships remain mutual. Enforce them without anger but with steady love and self-respect, because when you honor your own dignity, you invite others to do the same. Action 5. Stop giving without appreciation. As parents and elders, many of us were raised to believe that endless giving is a sign of love, but there comes a point when giving without appreciation no longer builds love, it builds entitlement. Generosity is a beautiful quality, but when it has no boundaries, it teaches others to take rather than to value. Think about it, when kindness is always available on demand, it begins to feel less like a gift and more like an obligation. That's what happened to George, a devoted father who never said no to his children. If they needed money, he handed it over. If they needed errands done, he dropped everything to do it. If they needed his time, he canceled his own plans. At first, he felt proud to be so reliable, but slowly something shifted. His children stopped thanking him, stopped recognizing his sacrifices, and began to assume that his help was guaranteed. Instead of gratitude, George felt invisible and used. It wasn't until he started pulling back, not to punish, but to protect his dignity, that things began to change. He began helping when it was reasonable, saying no when it wasn't, and reminding himself that his time and energy were just as important as theirs. The shift was subtle but powerful. His children began to notice the difference, realizing his support was not automatic but an act of love, freely given. Suddenly, thank you returned to their vocabulary, and respect grew where entitlement had taken root. The truth is, if you feel taken for granted, it may not be because others don't care, it may be because you've taught them, unintentionally, that you'll always give without limits. The good news is, you can retrain these dynamics by becoming intentional about what you give, when you give, and why you give. Ask yourself, am I giving from love, or from habit? Am I saying yes because I want to, or because I'm afraid to say no? When you start pulling back from automatic giving, you teach others that your time, energy, and resources are not infinite, and that your kindness should never be taken for granted. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or withholding, it means valuing yourself enough to make sure your giving is recognized, appreciated, and mutual. Healthy relationships are built on respect and gratitude, not one-sided sacrifice. Remember, you are not an endless resource to be drained, you are a human being with needs, desires, and limits. Teaching your children that your help is a gift, not a guarantee, is one of the fastest ways to reset the balance in your relationship and reclaim the respect you deserve. And when you give from a place of self-respect, your love carries even more meaning because it comes freely, not out of obligation. Action 6. Build a life outside them. Perhaps the most powerful and transformative step you can take, especially after 60, is to build a life that doesn't revolve entirely around your children, because the truth is, respect often flows naturally toward those who live fully and confidently. When you have your own hobbies, friendships, passions, and daily rhythms that bring you joy, your children begin to see you not only as a parent, but as a whole person, someone to admire, someone with dignity, someone whose life has depth beyond family obligations. Take Eleanor's story. After her husband passed away, she poured all her energy into her children, rearranging her life around their visits, their calls, and their needs. But the more she centered her world around them, the lonelier she felt when they couldn't show up. At first, she thought the answer was to give even more, but it only made her feel more invisible. Everything changed when she decided to reclaim her own life. She joined a book club, began traveling with friends, and started volunteering at a local center. To her surprise, not only did her days feel richer and fuller, but her children began to look at her differently. They saw a woman who was vibrant, independent, and respected, someone who stood tall on her own terms. Respect is rarely something you can demand through words, it is something you inspire by the way you live. And living fully beyond your children sends a powerful message, that your worth doesn't depend on their attention, that your happiness is not their responsibility, and that you are still writing your own story. That is what commands respect. So, stop chasing approval that never seems to come, lead with calm dignity instead of arguments, pull back emotional dependence so you aren't left waiting for their validation, set boundaries that show you value yourself, stop giving endlessly without appreciation, and finally, fill your own life with meaning and purpose beyond them. When you do these things, you won't have to beg for respect, it will naturally return, not because you forced it, but because you became a person they cannot help but respect. Your children will see your strength, your independence, your joy, and they will honor it. And more importantly, you will feel proud of yourself again, not just as a parent, but as a whole human being. If these words spoke to your heart, I invite you to leave a comment and share which step you feel ready to take first. And if you found value in this message, please subscribe to Timeless Wisdom Path, hit the bell icon so you never miss a new video, and share this with someone who might need encouragement today. Thank you for spending this time with me. Remember, you deserve respect, you deserve joy, and you deserve a life that shines brightly, not in the shadow of others, but in the light of your own worth. Stand tall, love yourself deeply, and let the way you live become the greatest lesson you ever teach.